Day 22, the Black blogger celebrates and reads excerpts of the Masters. Carter G. Woodson, the Miseducation of the Negro. I'm going to read the foreword and the preface in Chapter One. The thoughts brought together in this volume have been expressed in the recent addresses and articles written by the author. From time to time, persons deeply interested in the point of view therein presented have requested that these comments on education be made available in book form. To supply this demand, this volume is given to the public. In preparation of the volume, the author has not followed in detail the productions on which most of the book is based. The aim is to set forth only the thought developed in passing from one to the other. The language in some cases then is entirely new, and the work is not a collection of essays. In this way, repetition has been avoided except to emphasize the thesis which the author sustains. Carter Goodwin, Woodson, Washington, D.C., January 1933. Preface. Herein are recorded not opinions but reflections of one who for 40 years has participated in the education of the black, brown, yellow, and white races in both hemispheres and tropical and temperate regions. Such experience, too, has been with students in all grades from kindergarten to the university. The author, moreover, has traveled around the world to observe not only modern school systems in various countries, but to study the special systems set up by the private agencies and governments to educate the natives in their colonies and dependencies. Some of these observations, too, have been checked against more recent studies on the later tour. Discussing herein the mistakes made in the education of the Negro, the writer frankly admits that he has committed some of these errors himself. In several chapters, moreover, he specifically points out wherein he himself has strayed from the path of wisdom. This book, then, is not intended as a broadside against any particular person or class, but it is given as a corrective for methods which have not produced satisfactory results. The author does not support the once popular view that in matters of education, Negroes are rightfully subjected to the will of others, on the presumption that these poor people are not large taxpayers and must be content with charitable contributions to their uplift. The author takes the position that the consumer pays the tax, and as such, every individual of the social order should be given unlimited opportunity to make the most of himself. Such opportunity, too, should not be determined from without by forces set to direct the prescribed element in a way to redound solely to the good of others, but should be determined by the makeup of the Negro himself and by what his environment requires of him. This new program of uplift, the author contends, should not be decided upon by trial and error method in the application of devices used in dealing with others in a different situation and at another Epcot. Only by careful study of the Negro himself and the life which he is forced to lead can we arrive at the proper procedure in this crisis. The mere imparting of information is not education. Above all things, the effort must result in making a man think and do for himself, just as the Jews have done in spite of universal persecution. In thus estimating the results obtained from the so-called education of the Negro, the author does not go to the census figures to show the progress of the race. It may be of no importance to the race to be able to boast today of many times how many educated members it had in 1865. If they are of the wrong kind, the increase in numbers will be a disadvantage rather than an advantage. The only question which concerns us here is whether these educated persons are actually equipped to face the ordeal before them or unconsciously contribute to their own undoing by perpetuating the regime of the oppressor. Herein, however, lies no argument for the oft-heard contention that education for the white man should mean one thing and for the Negro a different thing. The element of race does not enter here. It is merely a matter of exercising common sense and approaching people through the environment in order to deal with conditions as they are rather than as you would like to see them or imagine they are. There may be a difference in the method of attack, but the principle remains the same. Highly educated Negroes denounce persons who advocate for the Negro a sort of education different in some respects from that is now given to the white man. Negroes who have long been inconvenienced and denied opportunities for development are naturally afraid of anything that sounds like discrimination. They are anxious to have everything the white man has, even if it is harmful. The possibility of originality in the Negro, therefore, is discounted 100% to maintain nominal equality. If the white man decides to take up Mormonism, the Negro must follow their lead. If the whites neglect such a study, then the Negroes must do likewise. The author, however, does not have such an attitude. He considers the educational system as it is developed both in Europe and America an antiquated process which does not hit the mark, even in the case of the needs of the white man himself. If the white man wants to hold on to it, let him do so, but the Negro, so far as he is able, should develop and carry out a program of his own. The so-called modern education, with all its defects, however, does others so much more good than it does the Negro, because it has been worked out in conformity to the needs of those who have enslaved and oppressed weaker people. For example, the philosophy and ethics resulting from an educational system that justified slavery, peonage, segregation, and lynching. The oppressor has the right to exploit the handicapped and to kill the oppressed. Negroes daily educated in the tenets of such a religion of the strong have accepted the status of the weak as divinely ordained, and during the last 3 generations of their nominal freedom, they have done practically nothing to change it. Their pouting and resolutions indulged in by a few of the race have been of little avail. No systemic effort toward change has been possible, for taught the same economics, history, philosophy, literature, and religion which has been established the present code of morals, the Negro mind has been brought under the control of his oppressor. The problem of holding the Negro down, therefore, is easily solved. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him not to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and he will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, there is no back door. He will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary. The same educational process which inspires and stimulates the oppressor with the thought that he is everything and has accomplished everything worthwhile, depresses and crushes at the same time the spark of genius in the Negro by making him feel that his race does not amount to much and never will measure up to the standards of other people. The Negro, thus educated, is a hopeless liability of the race. The difficulty is that the educated Negro is compelled to live and move among his own people whom he has been taught to despise. As a rule, therefore, the educated Negro prefers to buy his food from a white grocer because he has been taught that the Negro is not clean. It does not matter how often the Negro washes his hands, then he cannot clean them, and it does not matter how often a white man uses his hands, he cannot soil them. The educated Negro, moreover, is disinclined to take part in Negro business because he has been taught in economics that Negroes cannot operate in this particular sphere. The educated Negro gets less and less pleasure out of the Negro church, not on account of its primitiveness and increasing corruption, but because of his preference for the seats of the righteousness controlled by the oppressor. This has been his education, and nothing else can be expected of him. If the educated Negro could go off and be white, he might be happy, but only a mulatto now and then can do this. The large majority of this class then must go through life denouncing white people because they are trying to run away from the blacks and decrying the blacks because they are not white. The Miseducation of the Negro, Chapter One, the Seat of Trouble. The educated Negro has the attitude of contempt towards his own people because in their own as well as in their mixed schools, Negroes are taught to admire the Hebrew, the Greek, the Latin, and the Teuton, and to despise the African. Of the hundreds of Negro high schools recently examined by an expert in the United States Bureau of Education, only 18 offer a course taking up the history of the Negro, and in most of the Negro colleges and universities where the Negro is thought of, the race is studied only as a problem or dismissed as little consequence. For example, an officer of a Negro university thinking an additional course on Negro should be given there called upon a Negro doctor of philosophy or the faculty to offer such work. He promptly informed the officer that he knew nothing about the Negro. He did not go to school to waste his time that way. He went to be educated in the system which dismisses the Negro as a non-entity. At a Negro summer school 2 years ago, a white instructor gave a course on the Negro, using for his text a work which teaches that whites are superior to blacks. When asked by one of the students why he used such a textbook, the instructor replied that he wanted them to get that point of view. Even schools for Negroes, then, are places where they must be convinced of their inferiority. The thought of the inferiority of the Negro is drilled into him in almost every class he enters and almost every book he studies. If he happens to leave school after he masters the fundamentals before he finishes high school or reaches college, he would naturally escape some of this bias and may recover in time to be of service to his people. Practically all the successful Negroes in this country are of the uneducated type or that of the Negro who has no formal education at all. The large majority of Negroes who have put on the finishing touches of their best colleges are all but worthless in the development of their people. If after leaving school they had the opportunity to give out to Negroes what true answers of the race would like to have it learned, such persons may thereby earn a living at teaching or preaching what might have been taught, but they never become a constructive force in the development of the race. The so-called school then becomes a questionable factor in the life of this despised people. As another has well said, to handicap a student by teaching him that his black face is a curse and that his struggle to change his condition is hopeless is the worst sort of lynching. It kills one's aspirations and dooms him to a vagabondage and crime. It is strange then that the friends of truth and promoters of freedom have not risen up against the present propaganda in the schools and crushed it. This crusade is much more important than the anti-lynching movement because there would be no lynching if it did not start in the schoolroom. Why not exploit, enslave, or exterminate a class that everyone is taught to regard as inferior? To be more explicit, we may go to the seat of the trouble. Our most widely known scholars have been trained in universities outside of the South. Northern and Western institutions, however, had no time to deal with matters which concern the Negro especially. They must direct their attentions to the problems of the majority of their constituents, and too often they have stimulated their prejudices by referring to the Negro as unworthy of consideration. Most of what these universities have offered as language, mathematics, and science may have served a good purpose, but much of what they have taught as economics, history, literature, and religion, and philosophy as propaganda, and can't that be involved in waste of time and misdirected the Negroes thus trained? And even in the certitude of science or mathematics, it has been unfortunate that the approach to the Negro has been borrowed from a foreign method. For example, the teachers of The teaching of arithmetic in 5th grade in a backward county in Mississippi should mean one thing in the Negro school and decidedly a different thing in the white school. The Negro children, as a rule, come from the homes of tenants and peons who have to migrate annually from plantation to plantation, looking for light which they had never seen. The children from the homes of white planters and merchants live permanently in the midst of calculations, family budgets, and the like, which enable them sometimes to learn more by contact than Negro children can acquire in school. Instead of teaching such Negro children less arithmetic, they should be taught much more of it than white children, for the latter attends a graded school consolidated by free transportation, when the Negroes go to one school, one-room rented hovels to be taught without equipment and by incompetent teachers educated scarcely beyond the 8th grade. In the school of theology, Negroes are taught the interpretation of the Bible worked out by those who have justified segregation and winked at the economic debasement of the Negro, sometimes to the point of starvation. Deriving their sense of right from this teaching, graduates of such schools can have no message to grip the people whom they have been ill-trained to serve. Most of such miseducated ministers therefore preach to benches, while illiterate Negro preachers do the best they can in supplying the spiritual needs of the masses. In the schools of business administration, Negroes are trained exclusively in the psychology and economics of Wall Street and are therefore made to despise the opportunities to run ice wagons, push banana carts, and sell peanuts among their own people. Foreigners who have not studied economics but have studied Negroes take up this business and grow rich. In the schools of journalism, Negroes are taught how to edit such metropolitan dailies as the Chicago Tribune and the New York Times, which hardly would hire a Negro as a janitor. And when these graduates come to the Negro weeklies for employment, they are not prepared to function in such establishments, which, to be successful, must be built upon accurate knowledge of the psychology and the philosophy of the Negro. When a Negro has finished his education in our schools, then he has been equipped to begin the life of an Americanized or Europeanized white man. But before he steps from the threshold of his alma mater, he is told by his teachers that he must go back to his own people, from whom he had been estranged by a vision of ideals which in his disillusionment he will realize he cannot attain. He goes forth to play his part in life, but he must be both social and bisocial at the same time. While he is a part of the body politic, he is in addition to this a member of a particular race to which he must restrict himself in all matters social. While serving his country, he must serve within a separate group or special group. While being a good American, he must above all things be a good Negro, and to perform this definite function, he must learn to stay in a Negro's place. For the arduous task of serving a race thus handicapped, however, the Negro graduate has little or no training at all. The people whom he has been ordered to serve have been belittled by his teachers to the extent that he can hardly find delight in undertaking what his education has led him to think is impossible. Considering his race as blank and the achievement that he sets out to stimulate their imitation of others. The performance is kept up a while, but like any other effort at meaningless imitation, it results in failure. Facing this undesirable result, the highly educated Negro often grows sour. He becomes too pessimistic to be a constructive force, or usually develops into a chronic fault finder or complainant at the bar of public opinion. Often when he sees that fault lies at the door of the white oppressor whom he is afraid to attack, he turns upon the pioneering Negro who is at work doing the best he can to extricate himself from an uncomfortable predicament. In an effort to imitate, however, these educated people are sincere. They hope to make the Negro conform quickly to the standards of whites and thus remove the pretext for the barriers between the races. They do not realize, however, that even if the Negro do successfully imitate the whites, nothing new has thereby been accomplished. You simply have a larger number of people doing what others have been doing. The unusual gift of the race have not thereby been developed, and in an unwilling world, therefore, continues to wonder what the Negro is good for. These educated people, however, decry any such thing as race consciousness, and in some respects they are right. They do not like to hear expressions such as Negro literature, Negro poetry, African art, and thinking black, and roughly speaking, we must concede that such things do not exist. These things do not figure in the courses which they pursued in school, and why should they? Aren't we all Americans? Then whatever is American is as much the heritage of the Negro than any other group in this country. The highly educated contend, moreover, that when the Negro emphasizes these things, he invites racial discrimination by recognizing such differentness of the races. The thought that the Negro is one thing and the white man another is a stock and trade argument of the Caucasian to justify segregation. Why then should the Negro blame the white man for doing what he himself does? These highly educated Negroes, however, fail to see that it is not the Negro who takes this position. The white man forces him to, and to extricate himself therefrom, the Negro leader must so deal with the situation as to develop in the segregated group the power with which they can elevate themselves. The differentness of race, moreover, is no evidence of superiority or of inferiority. This merely indicates that each race has certain gifts which the others do not possess. It is by the development of these gifts that every race must justify its right to exist. In a real quick paragraph on how we missed the mark. How we arrived at this present state of affairs can be understood only by studying the forces effective in the development of Negro education, since it was systematically undertaken immediately after emancipation. To point out merely the defects as they appear today would be of little benefit to the present and future generations. These things must be viewed in their historic setting. The conditions of today have been determined by what has taken place in the past, and in a careful study of this history we may see more than clearly the great theater of events in which the Negro has played a part. We may understand better what his role has been and how well he has functioned in it. And that's the end of the reading for the day 22, the Miseducation of the Negro. The Black Blogger Reads the Masters, Carter G. Woodson.